Back on America's Forum, more on this developing story, what is termed the deliberate crash of the Germanwings airliner into the French Alps. This is a press conference featuring the CEO of Lufthansa. Of course, Germanwings, the economy airline of Lufthansa, Carsten Spohr, answering questions through a female interpreter in English. Let's listen.
We don't want to indulge in any speculations beyond the findings of the French authorities. Obviously, this code was not entered, which we cannot explain because everybody knows by heart this code, everybody involved, or this was done, and the cockpit captain prevented the door to open by actually pressing the button lock. So you needn't actually say anything in addition. No, this is totally correct. You said that the co-pilot interrupted the training 6 years ago. I would be interested to know how long he interrupted it and why. Yes, this covered a number of months, and this is quite feasible, and I cannot tell you anything about the reasons of this interruption. But I told you before that anybody who interrupts the training has to actually prove all the competence and do a lot of tests. So the competence and fitness will be checked again. Well, the fact that it was interrupted makes us think that there might be some relation. Of course, you have to be silent as a medical person beyond your death, and this is even so vis-à-vis me as CEO, and this will certainly be a matter of the investigations of the prosecutor. So we have no other possibility to act as a company. Is there, after the end of training, a series of psychological checks, etc., to see that everything is in order with the colleagues? Of course, we have regular checks, and we also have a medical check once per year.
We're trying to restore the feed we're getting of this news conference being held by Lufthansa, the parent company of Germanwings. Of course, Lufthansa, the international carrier emanating from Germany. Germanwings was its economy airline, if you will. And again, to recap this news, especially if you're joining us from out west where it's still early in the morning, developments today that are disturbing, as it has now been reported that in the opinion of a French prosecutor, the co-pilot of the Germanwings jet that crashed in the French Alps deliberately crashed the plane. He was able to lock the captain out of the cockpit. The name of now the suspect, the co-pilot, 28-year-old Andreas Lubitz, as we heard in the contemporaneous translation coming in on the press conference, one of the journalist's questions had to do with with an interruption in the training of co-pilot Lubitz some 6 years ago as he was undergoing training. And obviously, Miranda, we are trying to piece together more on this story. You reported earlier that different press organizations tried to track down friends and associates of Andreas Lubitz, and people are still asking why.
Right. The Associated Press, a lot of people asking questions about this co-pilot, his mental state. So far, the people that they've come in contact with have said he showed no signs of any mental illness, depression. And again, the Associated Press is also reporting that there are no indications of any kind of terrorist background on this co-pilot. This is what we do know about him. We do know that he had been with Germanwings parent company since September of 2013, that he had 630 hours of flight experience.
And speaking of flight experience, let's bring in our next guest, Charles Bud Bernat, who joins us by phone. And as you can see from the illustration of Charles Bud Bernat, he spent some time on the flight deck as a commercial airline pilot. Bud, we thank you very much for joining us in the wake of these disturbing reports coming from Europe today. Your initial reaction to this news, sir?
Mind-boggling. It goes totally alien. It goes against all the principles of a professional aviator. My bottom line on this is, why did they not have a policy of 2 people on the flight deck if one of the pilots leaves the flight deck? That's absurd and dangerous. What happened if that captain left the flight deck and the first officer had a heart attack? No one is in control.
And isn't that policy here in the United States, didn't that go into effect following 9/11?
It did slightly after, and also these improved doors that now all the airliners have, they're almost impenetrable, and he, being the co-pilot, had access to override and also put a mechanical lock in the locking mechanism, so you can't access it from the cabin area, and that seems to be what he did. A second person in there might have been able to prevent that from happening, for sure.
Bud, you were saying this is mind-boggling, yet in recent memory there have been episodes, other speculations about suicide by plane, where pilots may take down an aircraft. There's that accusation out there about an Egypt Air flight a few years ago. Given your vast professional experience, are you familiar with those other instances? In other words, this would not be unprecedented.
I believe there was like 5 of them since 1982, and probably the most recent one, more than likely, Malaysia Airline on that 777 that went into the ocean.
And that still is enshrouded in mystery. In terms of this today, and you pointed out the 2-person flight deck policy, which is now standard policy for American air carriers. What else comes to mind that you would change in terms of safety procedures on aircraft in the wake of what we are hearing today?
It needs to be mandatory, the 2-person rule on the flight deck. And that is the bottom line. I don't think an air carrier without that policy should be allowed to fly into U.S. airspace or to be certified as a commercial carrier.
Bud, if you'll indulge me for just a second, we want to point out that the press conference continues in Germany with the CEO of Lufthansa Airlines, Carsten Spohr. We continue to monitor that in its English translation, and we will have more comments from the Lufthansa CEO on this disturbing story that continues to develop. Bud, as a veteran of the flight deck, flying commercial airliners, you were subjected to flight physicals in the United States.
And personality tests, because we were
That's
talking about that
That's what we want to go
earlier.
to. Yes, the psychological testing. Does that remain a component of a flight health exam?
It is, and your flight doctor, the FAA medical examiner, he takes that into consideration during your well, actually, it's twice a year to hold an airline transport pilot rating. You need to get a flight physical twice a year.
Bud, we should point out here, our viewers are seeing the first pictures released of Andreas Lubitz down in the corner here of the screen, 28 years of age, the Germanwings co-pilot that authorities now say deliberately crashed the aircraft. Sorry to interrupt you on that point. If you want to continue, Bud, on the whole notion of psychological evaluation.
Oh, normally at most air carriers also, a new hire pilot gets evaluated by each captain after each flight. He's on a probation period for 1 year. There's a lot of things that are seen on duty and off duty type of behavior. I don't know if they have that at Germanwings as a procedure, but that's another part that could help scrutinize those that have gone through the basic original mental screening, psychological evaluations.
What would be some red flags to you? I mean, have you ever flown with somebody and been concerned about that particular individual? Is there some kind of policy in place where you can report that person if you are concerned? What's kind of standard procedure here?
Well, if we do observe something that seems extremely out of the ordinary, I know at United Airlines we have a professional standards committee that you could report a pilot to, and then they would take it from there, possibly have him re-evaluated both in the flight simulator and possibly, if there seemed to be a mental condition, by a company doctor. So there are additional avenues to pursue if, in fact, you observe something. And when you do overnights, you see what overnight stays at your destination.
And speaking,
normally, you'll get to see what type of person this is outside of the flight deck also.
right.
1 minute remains. You talked about flight simulation and going through procedures. Would you like to see it instituted now to have regular psychological evaluations of every pilot, every 6 months? Or is that too much? I'm sorry, Bud, can you hear me?
Okay,
I believe we just lost our connection with Charles Bud Bernat. We
Hopefully
thank
we
him
can
for calling in from
reconnect.
New Jersey. But obviously, in the wake of this, as we're trying to make sense of the senseless, we wonder what is next. There has to be some rethinking of the secure cockpit doors.
Right.
It would seem that in the wake of this, there has to be some enhanced psychological screening. But again, as we try to impose logic on what is an illogical, brutal action that is reported today, we'll continue to seek out sources to help us more on the developing story of the deliberate. A lot of questions remain on the deliberate crashing now, as it's reported, of that Germanwings jetliner in the French Alps. Our second hour of America's Forum will start right after this.